Hi friends, hi, hello, how are you? Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to talk about my January reading wrap up. I can't believe we're already here. But at the same time, January went forever, but it also went quite quickly. Time. If I look the same as my two past videos, let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it. Please. So I'm gonna talk about the books that I read in January, and I'm gonna be quite quick because a lot of these books I've talked about in various reading vlogs or reading vlogs that will be coming out in the next month or so. So I'll try and keep them short and sweet. We don't want to be here forever. So I'm just gonna tell you the books that I read and then I'll tell you my review of them if you care. Anyway, we're gonna start chronologically. So the first book I read was Longshadow by Olivia Atwater. This is book 3 in the Regency fairy tale series. The first book was Half a Soul and the second book was 10,000 Stitches. I love this series. This is just cozy fantasy. There are fairies, there are magic. The romance is Bridgerton-esque in the sense that actually there's no sex scenes really. It's there's pining and longing and hands touching and feelings and all that sort of stuff. I love it. It's adorable. I think Longshadow is the best book in this series. It's queer and it was just gorgeous. It really was. It was slightly darker than the previous two novels, which really worked well for me. It kind of leaned more into the gothic. We have Death as a character who was fantastic. I just thought that Mercy and Abigail were both really fantastic characters, especially Mercy. I loved Mercy, the best character in this entire series. I just really liked it. I really liked it. If you want just a good time, I highly recommend this series. It is truly just adorable and fun, and don't take them too seriously. Yeah. The next book I read was Pure Colour by Sheila Heti. I talked about this book in I think my first ever reading vlog on this channel. Confusing, deeply philosophical, reflective, also hopeful and lyrically and beautifully written. Like, it's weird and also gorgeous, and I really want to read more of Sheila Heti's books. I think she's an author that I could very easily fall in love with. Yeah, if you want more of my thoughts, watch that reading vlog because I talk more about it. But I gave this 4.5 stars. Upon reflection, I gave it 4.5 stars. I think I initially gave it 5 stars, but then I was like, I'll give it 4.5 stars. That feels a bit better. I then read Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. I've actually given this book to Hannah to read because I just thought it was adorable. I loved this. It's historical romance fantasy. We have Emily Wilde and she is a scholar. She researches the supernatural, the fairies. Just, it was just such a joyous book to read. So similar to Longshadow, I did wish it ventured more into high fantasy. I feel like if this book was, if it committed to adult high fantasy, it would have been absolutely insane and amazing because it could have been more violent and darker and just more unsettling. But for 315 pages, it was great. Emily Wilde was a really fascinating character. She kind of leaned a little bit towards the unlikable. I just, especially in the beginning, but she reflected throughout the novel on certain aspects of herself and of her empathy, and I adored her. And her academic rival, Mr. Brambleby, was a fabulous character. I love that they're kind of like academic rivals to friends to lovers, but in actuality Brambleby is like, but you're my best friend. Like in his mind they're not enemies, but Emily's like, oh, I hate you, but also you're my only friend. I just loved the dynamic. I thought it was really cute. I recommend this book. It was gorgeous. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was just so whimsical and adorable and also eerie. The last 50 pages though, a bit strange. Everything happens and I felt like it could have just been pulled up the threads a bit more, but again, what a time. What a time. As you all know, I read Elektra this month by Jennifer Saint. I will not talk a lot about this book because in an upcoming video I am going to talk this book to death, but just know that I loved it. 5 stars. It was violent, it was feminist, it was also heartbreaking, but it was stunning. It was stunning. So Elektra, just really quickly, Elektra centers on 3 women that are affected in various ways by the Trojan War. We have Cassandra, Clytemnestra, and Elektra. This book felt different to Ariadne because I felt like it was a bit darker, a bit more violent. And one of the main characters, Elektra, is purely unlikable. You do not empathize with her. You do not sympathize. Actually, no, you do empathize with her, but you also want to shake her with frustration because she is a woman who is unable to perceive the world from any other perspective than her own. She refuses to empathize with not only her mother, but just like any other woman really, and also just person. She like idolizes to an almost perverted degree her father Agamemnon, and kind of like a level of indoctrination almost. She was just blinded by her view of this man who she never really knew anyway. Elektra, in a way, I kind of became complicit in the system as well as a vehicle to perpetuate the continual oppression of women and like violence against women within kind of her circle, within her society. But similar to Ariadne, Elektra, the book, and also through the character, concentrates on the stories of these women who almost always are victims or punished for the crimes of men. So the character Elektra, you hate her, you don't like her. Then at the end you feel sorry for her because, again, it's the women who are punished much more severely than the men who actually do crimes, who do worse things. But Elektra is kind of the one who has to take on that responsibility of being punished for this crime. But you could also argue that Cassandra also happens to her. Clytemnestra, it also happens to her. I loved Cassandra in this and I loved Clytemnestra. Those 2 characters were phenomenal. And the way that this is written, absolutely incredible. Jennifer Saint is stunning. She's a stunning writer and I will forever like read her books because I just think that the way that she writes women unapologetically, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And then I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Who am I? So I again won't talk about this book much because it is for a future video. I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. It was unsettling, it was eerie, a mind fuck, it was gothic. There was a haunted house and things happen and you don't really know what's going on and you don't know if you should rely on the narrator because the narrator is slightly unreliable, but at the same time you're kind of freaked out. I really enjoyed this. I've never read a Shirley Jackson novel before, so I do want to read some of her other works. I think there's one like We Always Lived in the Castle or something that I would like to read. I had fun. I had fun. Allenor. The next book, I gave 3 stars, but for at least over half of this book it was sitting on a 2. It's The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. I'm reading this for a video that I'm planning on, and so I won't talk about it, but I hated this book. I hated it. I rant about it in that video, but the last like 50 to 80 pages, incredible. I loved the last 80 pages, we'll say 80 pages. I loved the last 80 pages because they were just so engaging and awesome. I'm like, where was that? I shouldn't say I hated the book. I hated aspects of the book, but in respect to the fact that it was just boring and dull, and the characters are boring and dull. But what I did enjoy is that the school, the Scholar Man's school, kind of had a bit more of a part to play, especially in the last aspect of the novel, which was the reason why I was so into it at the end. It's very readable, you have to admit, it's quite readable. I just didn't enjoy, I don't enjoy the way these books are written. Naomi Novik had such gorgeous writing in like Uprooted and Spinning Silver, and then these books are just bleh. Like, I don't know how to explain to you how much of a chore it can be to read these novels. There will be just like pages of our main character Al explaining something to us as the reader, like referring to a you. So I don't know if we're gonna find out in like the third book who she's actually talking to, but she's referenced as a you, and she just gives an explanation, and these explanations go forever. It can be like within a tiny conversation, and so she's like says something, or someone says something to her, and she's like, oh, you're most likely trying to figure out what the fuck this means. Well, actually, and then she just goes on, and then goes back to the conversation as if it hasn't been 5 million pages. So I don't like the way this is written, and I'm really just gonna stop it there. I then read Son of Sin by Omar Sakr, and this is an Aussie author. I really enjoyed this, gave it 3.5 stars. I have a reading vlog where I talk about this book. It was gorgeous. It was, but it wasn't without its flaws, and I kind of talk about that in my reading vlog, so check that out. I enjoyed it. I can definitely appreciate the author's exceptional talent, but overall I feel like it just needed a bit more tweaking. But I do recommend this. Just know that there are trigger warnings for child abuse, SA, domestic violence, so be careful. In the same vlog where I read Son of Sin, I read A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. First of all, can we appreciate how gorgeous and tiny this book is? The physical aspect of reading this was absolutely awesome. I enjoyed this. I gave this 3.5 stars. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a favorite of mine, but I'd never read Ernest Hemingway before. The story was good, the characters were interesting, and the writing, I did enjoy the writing, certain aspects of the writing. It was just a good time. I think that this, especially if you get past like the 100-page mark, is just a very easy, digestible classic. Basically, it's not super dense, it's not inaccessible in terms of how it's written. It's not like a Jane Austen or a Bronte or even a Dickens. It's straightforward, to the point, almost too much to the point. But I think give this a go, but remember, it did take me a little bit to fully get invested, and I don't think I necessarily enjoy the way Ernest Hemingway writes women. So, I can't believe I don't have this on me. I had to give it back to the library, but I read Slewfoot by Brom. 5 stars. Fabulous, feral, incredible, gorgeous. One of my favorite books of the year, hands down. And it's only January. Like, it's stunning. I love Abatha. I love Slewfoot. I love everything that happens. They take back, especially Abatha, like, just empowers herself, decides to just become who she truly is, and when she realizes just how expansive and how powerful she is, like expansive in terms of how her power is, and she decides to just take her power back. I loved it. It was empowering, it was gorgeous, and it was violent. Literally, what else do you want from a book? I then read Belladonna by Adalyn Grace. I gave this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It's not fantastic, but it's fun, light-hearted, things happen. I feel like there were pacing issues. It felt like the story lost its focus slightly, but we have the character Death. It's literally a romance between Death and our main character, Signa. It was just it was fun. It was lighthearted, it was fun, it was slightly gothic. We're gonna ignore the fact that Death is literally as old as time itself, and he's falling in love with a 19-year-old. It's fine. We're also gonna ignore the fact that Death is just like the assumption that Death is a man. Like there's no really exploration of how he understands gender norms, but whatever. It seems like, because we were also introduced to his brother Fate. Fate is also a man. Where are the women? And why aren't these timeless entities, these supernatural beings, so hard up for like the normative structures of humanity? Like you'd think they'd be above that, because they literally... Anyway, we're gonna ignore the fact that Death also waited for Signa to grow up. We're gonna ignore those. If you ignore those, it's a lighthearted young adult fantasy. If you don't ignore those, this is strange. But I had fun. And then the book that I just most recently finished. I finally did it, y'all. Finally did it. I read Lapvona by moshfegh. 5 words to describe this: disgusting, depraved, violent, beautifully written. And what a paradox. What a paradox. I don't know how to talk about this book, because I don't know myself how I feel about it. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. I think I loved it. I did. But I think I loved the themes of this novel more than the actual plot of the novel. I think it's just really an exploration of humanity and depravity and evil and our concepts of good and evil and what it means to be godly and good, as well as corruption and power and authority. It was a time. I don't even know how to explain what the book is about. But we have the town of Lapvona. It's a feudal town it's owned or governed by Lord William, who is essentially one of our villains in this book. And I say one of because everyone is a villain. Everyone is atrocious. There's cannibalism, there's SA, pedophilia, like literally everything. Do you see how hard it is to describe this book? So we have this boy named Marek, and he is physically disabled, and his father Jude is a shepherd, and his father again is physically abusive. They live in the town called Lapvona, and they have this very specific way of understanding their relationship and their faith with God, to God, for God, with God. So Jude and Marek specifically don't go to church, but they do kind of worship God in their own way. And for them, it is through pain and through suffering, essentially martyring themselves, where they feel the most closest to God, and they feel as though they're being blessed by Him. And then you have like the town of Lapvona, who it's essentially the same thing, where they feel like through pain and through suffering, that is how they're going to get their place in heaven. And it's essentially, it's perpetuated by this type of discourse that is coming from the priest of Lapvona, Father Barbaros, I think his name is, but he is in the pocket of Lord William, who is essentially telling the priest, like, this is what you say because I'm taking all their food and all their profits, and they need to feel as though they're suffering for a reason. It's very sad and horrible, but you have this intense like worry for like entering heaven and or going to hell, like juxtaposed with this really weird like sexual depravity and like the overall sexual repression of this town, but also of like Marek, of Jude, and of just the people. So they do strange things. Then you kind of go further into this idea of like what is hell and what is paradise and what is God and what is not. And so you have this running kind of theme or motif, symbolism, I don't know how you would call it, where like Jude and this other character named Grigor, and maybe even a character Ina, if I remember correctly, who for them, their faith, they believe that God is life, he embodies life, he is the soil, he is the plants, he is the vegetables, he is the birds, he is what gives us life. Essentially, that's how these few people kind of consider what God is. And maybe even the town of Lapvona, it wasn't necessarily made clear. And you have that, and then you have another character, Luca, who thinks of God like the stars in the sky, like these bright lights, and when he looks at the dark sky and at the night sky, he thinks that he is seeing kind of God's godliness, essentially. And then you have these like things all interwoven throughout the story where there are characters who are considering like, what is hell? Is hell the flame, or is it just utter complete darkness, like the absence of light? And then you have that with like depictions of characters seeing the night sky with no stars, just utter darkness, in order to kind of emphasize their corruption and their descent into evil. And then you have Lord William again thinking that his land is being poisoned, and this idea that the land is toxic, and how that then in turn is also like a depiction of Lord William's corruption, not only in life and how he treats people and what he's doing, but also of his soul. So it's just a very, very interesting exploration of just like not only of religiosity, but specifically of hell and good and evil and corruption and power. I really loved it. But I don't know if I would recommend it because what the fuck? Oh, also I want to talk about the character Agatha. Agatha is Marek's mother, and I think she is the person who is meant to be symbolized with the sheep. If you know Agatha's story, I think that's who the sheep represents because of her story of what happens to her, and especially at the end, again with this idea that she is giving birth to the new Messiah, the Lamb of God, and essentially she is sacrificed for it. So Agatha's character was fascinating, and I wish we spent more time with her, but yeah. And that's the books that I read in January. It is the second last day of January, so if I finish another book I will insert that clip here. I ended up reading one more book in January, and that's And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman. I actually filmed the entire experience of me reading this. To say that I sobbed would be an understatement. I finished reading this book and I went straight to my mum, just like crying. And she's like, "Do you need a hug?" I'm like, "Yes, I do. I very much would like that, thank you." So, And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer it's heartbreaking, it's heartwarming at the same time. It's about love. We have this grandfather, he's losing his memory. He's got either Alzheimer's and it's him talking to his grandson about Noah, about how he's scared about losing his memory, about forgetting, really, but also not only his family, but also the love of his life, his wife who had passed away. And you're in both like reality and also in the grandfather's mind. It's just the most heartbreaking thing, and I feel like everyone at some point in their life will read this and relate to it. I really relate to it. This sort of stuff is I'm very sensitive to, but it's just it kind of broke me, but like not in a traumatic way. It was just like kind of bittersweet. And the ending of this, wow. I don't really want to say much because I don't want to ruin people's experience of reading this book, because I think you should know as little as possible, but just trigger warnings, because it is just for like sadness. It will make you sad because it's just the way it's written. Fredrik Backman has some of the most like emotionally effective writing. I read Anxious People by him, I think last year or the year before, and he just knows how to get you. He understands humans, he understands us and our motivations. But yeah, this, not only is it about a grandfather who is coming to terms with aging and with the eventual loss of his memory, and just something that's so, fundamental to him, to us. Our brain is kind of working against us, but it's also just about love. Oh, the love in this book, not only between the grandson and the grandfather, but just familial love. His love for his wife was magnificent. I love this book. I love this book so much. You will see the vlog for this, or just like the video for this. It only took me 40-ish minutes to read, maybe under that. I did stop and start a bit because I needed to get tissues, but you'll see me reading this. But I loved it. That's really all. So back to me from the past. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, just thank you so much for being here. I love this. I love talking to you all. I always think that I'm just talking into the abyss, but then I get a comment and then I realize that people do actually watch me, which is funny. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for clicking on my face. Take care, stay safe. I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, whatever. I will see you soon, and happy reading.